Abraham tithed one time in his entire life, not weekly, not monthly, not from his income, not from his herds, not from his flocks, one time, from the spoils of one battle. To one priest he met one afternoon, and then, Genesis 14 verse 23, he refused to keep a single shoelace of the rest for himself. That is the man pastors stand on every Sunday to tell you that you must hand over 10% of your paycheck for the rest of your life, or be cursed. You have been lied to, not by one preacher, not by one church, by a doctrine so old, so repeated, so dressed in the language of obedience that most believers will defend it before they ever open their Bible to check it. Today we open the Bible, today we check. Because there are 10 things you have been told about tithing that are simply not in the text. And by the end of this video, every single one of them will be on the floor. Lie number 1. The tithe was never money. It was always food. Open Leviticus chapter 27 verse 30. Read it slowly. All the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy unto the Lord. The land, the seed, the fruit of the tree, not the paycheck, not the salary, not the silver in your pocket. The tithe the Bible commanded was crops, grain, wine, oil, the increase of herds. Deuteronomy 14 verse 23. Thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herds. 2 Chronicles 31 verse 5. First fruits of corn, wine, oil, and honey, and the tithe of all things they brought in abundantly. What things? The increase of the field, the animals of the herd, the produce of the land. Now hear what shakes the foundation of every tithe your money sermon ever preached. Coins existed in Israel. Silver shekels existed. Gold existed, wages existed. The law had 1,000 opportunities to specify silver. It deliberately did not, because the tithe was never about a percentage of currency. It was about the increase God brought up out of the soil. So when a preacher tells you the Bible commands you to tithe your paycheck, you hand him an open Bible and you ask one question: show me the verse. Show me one place in any of the 66 books where God commands a tithe of money. He cannot, because it does not exist. Lie number 2. Only farmers and herdsmen tithed. Carpenters did not. Fishermen did not. Numbers chapter 18 verse 24. The Levites were given no land in Israel, and the increase of the land was given to them in place of their inheritance. Read Leviticus 27 verses 30 through 32. Tithe of the land, tithe of the herd. Read Deuteronomy 14 verse 22. All the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. Tithing was tied, specifically surgically, to agricultural increase from the promised land. Now hear me. Jesus was a carpenter. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen. Paul was a tent maker. Matthew was a tax collector. Lydia was a seller of purple. Aquila and Priscilla worked with their hands. Not one of them paid a tithe under the law, because tithing did not apply to wages, trade, or craftsmanship. It applied to the harvest of the land. The Lord Jesus himself, the one every preacher claims commanded the tithe, was not required to tithe under the law of Moses, because he worked with wood. Read that again. The Lord himself did not tithe. So when the modern pulpit tells you that every salaried believer must hand over 10% of their paycheck, that doctrine has no foundation in the text. It was never a universal command. It was an agricultural command for landholders in one specific nation under one specific covenant. Lie number 3. There was not one tithe. There were 3, totaling about 23%. This is the lie that breaks the calculator. The Mosaic Law did not contain one tithe. It contained 3, and every one of them was different. The first, the Levitical tithe. Numbers 18 verse 21. 10% of the increase every year given to feed the Levites who served in the temple. The second, the festival tithe. Deuteronomy 14 verses 22 to 27. Another 10% set aside annually for celebration before the Lord. And here's the verse almost no preacher will read aloud. Deuteronomy 14 verse 26. Thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth, and thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. A tithe you eat yourself, with wine, with strong drink, commanded by God. If your pastor preached that tithe, his offering bucket would empty in a Sunday. The third, the poor tithe. Deuteronomy 14, verses 28 and 29. Every third year, the tithe stayed in your own town to feed the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Do the math. 2 tithes every year, 1 extra every third year, no tithe in the 7th Sabbath year. Averaged across the 7-year cycle, the actual obligation was approximately 23%, and a third of it the giver consumed himself in celebration. The 10% of your paycheck doctrine is not the biblical tithe. It is a fragment, ripped from one of 3 obligations, stripped of its food, stripped of its land, and resold as a universal law God never wrote. Lie number 4. The storehouse was a grain room, not your local church. Now we walk into Malachi, because every modern tithe sermon ends in the same place. Malachi chapter 3 verse 10. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And every modern preacher tells you the storehouse is the church building you sit in on Sunday. Open Nehemiah. Read what the storehouse actually was. Nehemiah 13 verses 10 to 12. The Levites had abandoned the temple to work the fields because the storehouse was empty and they had nothing to eat. Nehemiah commanded the people to bring the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil back into the treasuries, into the chambers. Read Nehemiah 10 verses 38 and 39 for yourself. The tithe of the tithes unto the house of our God, to the chambers, into the treasure house, for there are the vessels of the sanctuary. The storehouse was a literal physical food warehouse. Chambers in the temple, where grain, wine, and oil were stored, so the Levites could eat and the poor could be fed. 2 Chronicles 31, verses 11 and 12. Hezekiah commanded chambers to be prepared in the house of the Lord, and they brought in the tithes faithfully. A modern church building, with a payroll, a mortgage, a sound system, and a senior pastor on a salary, is not the storehouse of Malachi.